hearts are like that beautiful stranger that you aren't expecting to see on the street. You walk by them, you're like dun 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 dun. And then you like watch them walk down the rest of the street. Except in this case, the plant's stationary, so you'd be like walking forward and looking back. Just dumb and not safe. For some reason I find that this is not a very expected plant to see. It's always a pleasant surprise for people. The Latin is Lamprocapnos Spectabilis. It sounds very much like a Harry Potter spell. Lamprocapnos Spectabilis. When you say spring flowers, I think most people usually think of crocuses, tulips, daffodils. At least in my plant circles, a lot of people don't mention bleeding heart. And it is in fact a very short-lived beauty in the spring. Bleeding hearts are ephemeral. Have you ever heard that term? It just means that they only grow for a very short period of time and then they die back and go dormant until the following season. It's very gracious of them, because if there were always bleeding hearts around, who would look at anything else? Lamprocapnos is in the poppy family, Propagation. They originated from Japan. The Latin spectabilis means sort of showy or spectacular. I don't know if people are intimidated by bleeding hearts or they just don't like its short growing season, but I go for a lot of walks in the springtime and I rarely see bleeding hearts in people's gardens. Bleeding hearts are herbaceous perennials, and they grow really well in sort of shaded, woody areas. With bleeding hearts, it's all about location. Location, location, location. Shade gardens are great, parts on gardens are good too. You can even plant them under coniferous trees. Usually the soil's a bit too acidic for a lot of plants because the needles from the trees fall down and create kind of an acidic soil environment. But bleeding heart is not that picky with soil pH. So that's an option. Planting bleeding hearts near a deciduous tree is always my top recommendation. It creates a nice amount of shade, but still lets some sunlight through because the bleeding heart will bloom before the tree gets a lot of leaves. So it'll have its time in the sunlight, it'll still have some nice shade from the tree, and then it will likely already be dying back for the season once the tree starts to really get its full foliage happening. The other thing is when the leaves fall in the autumn, the leaf mold that develops at the base, if you leave it undisturbed, is very similar to its natural sort of shade woodland environment. You can plant other shade-loving plants near bleeding heart, hostas, ferns, coral bells. Ooh, that's a happy foursome right there. You can find seeds for bleeding hearts, but you have to do a dormancy mimic. So you have to take the seeds, plant them in your pot, and then put your pot in the freezer for like 6 to 8 weeks. It's a bit of a task. I would recommend actually just buying an established plant and propagating if you want more than one, or finding someone that's doing clump division to give you a piece of their plant. Get on your local gardening forums online. You know, just post that you're looking. Who knows, maybe someone will have one. That's the best way to share plants, really. At the right time of year, you might find a bleeding heart that's willing to share their bleeding heart. This plant has rhizomous roots, okay? I'm actually going to take it out of the pot here. Very carefully, I'm going to make a big mess. You can see the roots being rhizomous. Once this is planted in the ground, these rhizomes will spread horizontally and create new growth along its nodes. These rhizomes are what store the starches and proteins that the plant needs to survive its cold season and come back the following year. I want to get really botanical here with the foliage. So here's a main stem here, and you can see that the petioles, or these offshoot stems, are coming up in an alternating pattern. And on each petiole, you've got a set of compound leaves. That's what this is called. Each little section of leaf or leaflets are trifoliate in their pattern. And there's 1, 2, 3. And even trifoliate singularly, see 1, 2, 3. And all of these together create a compound foliage pattern. Pretty cool. Bleeding hearts will grow about 1 to 2 feet high and spread 2 to 3 feet horizontally. So give them a little bit of space. The foliage for Lamprocapnos will naturally turn yellow at the end of its season. It really only stays in bloom for a couple weeks, depending on where you are and what your climate is like. Once temperatures start to hit above 25 degrees Celsius steadily, consistently, it's just not happy anymore, and it's a signal for it to start to die back. The flowers are these fantastic, like bum pillow like flowers. Who loves food and plants that look like bums? Me. I'm one of those people. You could also say heart-shaped, and then once it starts to bloom, it gets these two lower petals at the bottom that come out from the interior that resemble like a drop, hence the bleeding. You can get up to like 20 flowers on one arching stalk. That's amazing. Some people will say that they're pendant flowers because of the way that they're hanging. This pink and white is probably one of the most popular cultivars. There's also an Alba cultivar that's just pure white, very elegant. Valentine is also a very popular variety. It's just a bit more reddish as opposed to pink, red and white. Also, some people call this flower lady in a bath because if you turn it upside down and spread out the outer petals a bit, it looks like a lady sitting in a bath. Or like a meditating person. As I mentioned, the flowers only stay in bloom for a couple weeks. It's very fleeting. If you just got a bleeding heart from a garden center and that's why you're looking at this video and still in your little starter pot, the main thing I want you to remember is don't prune it. I don't care if it looks ugly, okay? If you don't like the way it looks, too bad. You gotta let it do its thing. It's very important for its life cycle. When it starts to yellow and die back, it's still doing a lot of work. It's storing up energy and nutrients to survive the winter. Watering is kind of interesting for this one. So it really likes to be moist, but it doesn't like to be waterlogged. So you have to be careful. So water it consistently. That's the key. The plant will expect to be watered, say, once a week, and it will just retain that nice moist level. If you just soak it irregularly, it's not going to like that. And make sure that your soil is well draining. It's not going to like sitting in clay soil. It could die if you just leave it soaking like that. Okay, now I do want to show you something. See this right here? This is not yellowing because it's dying back. This is obvious yellow and browning edges because it's thirsty, okay? And that's different than the leaves just yellowing and dying off. If you see this on your leaves while your plant's in bloom, you're not watering enough. Here's some fresh little newbies just coming out. Here's a pod from a flower that's actually already going to seed. I need to get this guy in the ground. I highly, highly, highly recommend mulching your bleeding heart too, okay? They usually come in mulch if you buy a little container. The mulch not only retains moisture in its soil, but it keeps the temperature lower as well. It kind of keeps the plant cooler. Ultimately, you're going to have it in bloom longer. Wood chips are great, but leaf mold is really great because, like we said, it mimics its natural environment in the wild. It does like rich soil. You could add a little bit of compost. Some people claim that fertilizing will lengthen its bloom time. If the temperatures rise, the blooms are going to go, but I think fertilizer can help. I'd say mulching matters more. That's just me. If you're interested in propagating, most people will do what's called clump division. So you can do stem cuttings, you can let them self-seed, they will do that. But clump division is very popular. If you just bought a plant, maybe give it a season or two to establish itself. With clump division, you're literally just gently pulling apart clumps of roots, okay? Don't do clump division when your bleeding heart is in bloom. It's like 2-3 weeks of glory. Don't disturb it during this time. I would do it after it starts to die back, but not too close to a frost. Kind of find that sweet spot in your season. You can also just let the flowers self-seed, and then if you get little seedlings that come up the next year, you can pull those out. They transplant quite well. Bleeding hearts are toxic, so don't feed them to your cat, don't feed them to your dog, don't let your baby eat them. Deer won't eat them. Bonus. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you want to watch more videos like this. They come out every Friday. Major league short-term eye candy. Year after year.